The banquet hall glittered with the opulence of a world that had long since stopped listening to the voices of the common man. Chandeliers cast golden light upon tables draped in pristine white cloth, where silver cutlery gleamed beside glasses, filled with the most expensive wines known to the elite. The air was thick with arrogance, a collective smirk exchanged between the billionaires who believed themselves untouchable. Among them sat Richard Calloway, the CEO of Titan Industries, a man whose empire spanned continents and whose wealth could buy the loyalty of entire governments. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of amber liquor between his fingers, his lips curled in amusement. Across the room, Senator JD Vance stood at a podium, his voice steady but edged with urgency. He was no stranger to this crowd, though he was never truly one of them. He had seen both sides, the struggle of the working class and the unchecked indulgence of the elite. Tonight, he wasn't here to exchange pleasantries or bask in the wealth of the privileged. He was here to deliver a warning. "The people are not blind," Vance said, his gaze sweeping over the room of indifferent faces. "They see the greed. They feel the consequences of decisions made in rooms just like this one. You sit in your towers, assuming the foundation beneath you is unshakable. But I promise you, storms are coming. And when they arrive, no amount of money will be enough to buy your way out." The room responded with stifled chuckles, whispered asides, and the occasional scoff. But none were as loud or as deliberate as Richard Calloway's laughter. He didn't even try to contain it. The sound echoed through the hall, a deep, rolling chuckle that turned heads and tightened jaws. He leaned forward, placing his drink on the table and fixed Vance with a smirk. "Oh, come now, Senator," Calloway said, shaking his head. Every few years, someone comes along with the same tired speech. The reckoning, the collapse, the people fighting back. And yet here we are. Nothing changes. He gestured around the room, inviting the others to share in his amusement. "Do you really think a bunch of angry workers with slogans and protest signs are going to bring down an empire built on decades of power, influence, and control?" The laughter spread. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed as if the warning had never been given. Vance's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. He didn't flinch. "You think you're untouchable," he said, his voice softer now but no less sharp. "You think the system will protect you forever. That's your mistake." Calloway shrugged, the smirk never leaving his face. "We'll see about that." Days passed. The banquet faded into memory. Just another night of excess in a life built on dominance. But the words Vance had spoken, though dismissed in the moment, began to echo in ways Calloway could not have predicted. The first sign came subtly. A tremor, a whisper in the wind that only those paying close attention could hear. A small but unexpected dip in Titan Industries' stock value. A few minor headlines questioning the company's latest acquisitions. Calloway barely noticed. He was too busy finalizing a major deal that would cement Titan's monopoly over a crucial supply chain. He stood in his glass-walled office, overlooking the city he believed he owned, as lawyers and executives moved like clockwork around him. The deal was nearly complete. The final signatures were being placed. Then the power flickered. A strange occurrence in a building where nothing ever malfunctioned. A second later, his phone vibrated with a notification, one that made his blood run cold. A government investigation had been launched against Titan Industries. Not just any investigation. A full-scale probe into financial misconduct, antitrust violations, and political bribery. Calloway's hand tightened around his phone. "Sir," his assistant stammered, her face pale as she approached. "We have a problem." And as Calloway turned to face her, the warning JD Vance had given him echoed once more in his mind. The storm had begun. Richard Calloway stood frozen, his grip on his phone tightening as his assistant's panicked eyes met his. The weight of her words sank in slowly, like an anchor dragging him into the depths of something he had never believed possible. Problems. happened to other people, smaller companies, weaker men, those who lacked the power to control their own fate. But now, the cracks in his empire were forming right beneath his feet, and for the first time in years, he felt something eerily close to fear. What kind of problem? His voice came out sharp, but the edge was dulled by uncertainty. The assistant hesitated, her throat bobbing as she swallowed. The DOJ just announced a full-scale investigation into Titan Industries, she said, lowering her voice as if speaking. The words too loudly would make them more real. Stock is plummeting. The press is all over it. Calloway's phone buzzed again. He glanced down at the screen. News alerts, emails from legal teams, frantic messages from board members demanding answers. He swiped to open the first article, his pulse pounding against his skull. Titan Industries under federal investigation. Allegations of market manipulation, fraud, and political corruption. He exhaled through his nose, forcing a smirk, even as dread coiled in his gut. This was a bad headline, sure. But he had seen bad headlines before. He had weathered storms before. Calm down, he said, slipping his phone into the pocket of his tailored suit. It's just noise. Get me a meeting with our lawyers. His assistant hesitated. Sir, there's more. Calloway exhaled, his patience thinning. More? She handed him a tablet, her fingers trembling slightly. Calloway took it, his eyes scanning the article displayed on the screen. Then he saw the name, and for the first time, his stomach truly dropped. Senator JD Vance calls for immediate legal action against Titan Industries. We will no longer tolerate this level of corruption. The room felt colder, the air heavier. Vance's face stared back at him from the article, a face that was no longer issuing warnings. No, this was something else. A promise. Calloway set the tablet down carefully, his mind racing. This wasn't just an investigation. This wasn't some regulatory slap on the wrist that he could buy his way out of. This was a direct attack, and Vance was leading the charge. Get me my legal team, he said again, but this time, his voice lacked its usual confidence. Within the hour, his most trusted lawyers filled the massive conference room, their expressions varying from concerned to outright alarmed. One of them, a man who had handled countless corporate scandals before, cleared his throat. It's bad, he said simply. They're coming at us from every angle. Wire fraud, antitrust violations, bribery allegations. They have. Nothing, Calloway snapped. It's a smear campaign. Another lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, shook her head. They have evidence, and not just circumstantial. We're hearing whispers of whistleblowers, leaked documents, real ammunition. The government isn't just fishing. They think they can win this. Calloway leaned forward, his jaw tightening. Then we shut it down. A silence fell over the room. No one spoke. Finally, one of the younger attorneys shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sir, I don't think we can. Calloway's fingers curled into fists. He had spent decades ensuring that nothing, no lawsuit, no scandal, no competitor, could bring him down. He had bought politicians, buried investigations, crushed unions, and silenced critics. And yet, here he was, facing something that felt inevitable. He stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm not going to sit here and let some washed-up senator and a bunch of bureaucrats destroy everything I built. The head lawyer exhaled, his face grim. Richard, you're not hearing us. This isn't going away. This isn't some nuisance lawsuit. This is a full-blown federal case. They have the power to freeze assets, subpoena records, seize documents. Calloway's phone buzzed again. Another message. He glanced at it. Major investors pulling out. Board demanding emergency meeting. Stocks in freefall. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. This wasn't just bad press. This was a collapse, and JD Vance had seen it coming. The laughter from that night, the smug confidence, the dismissive chuckles came back to haunt him like a ghost. He had mocked Vance, mocked the idea that his empire could ever be shaken. But now, as he stood at the edge of ruin, he realized something with a clarity that sent ice through his veins. The warning hadn't been a prediction. It had been a death sentence. But it wasn't supposed to happen to him. Calloway strode toward the waiting convoy of black SUVs, his face set in stone. His top legal counsel, Philip Garner, stood by the car, a phone pressed to his ear. The moment he saw Calloway, he ended the call with a sharp nod. "They're not budging," Garner said, falling into step beside him as they climbed into the back seat. "Vance's committee is pushing for a full-scale hearing. They want you in front of Congress." Calloway exhaled slowly, his fingers drumming against his knee. "That's not going to happen." Garner gave him a look. "You might not have a choice." The car sped toward the city, the rain streaking against the tinted windows. Outside, Washington loomed like an iron fortress, a place Calloway had always controlled from the shadows. Now it felt like enemy territory. "This is a political hit job," Calloway muttered. "Vance is making an example out of me." Garner adjusted his cufflinks, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe, but this time, it's not just Vance. The media is running with it. The DOJ is mobilized. The White House isn't intervening on your behalf." He let that last part hang in the air. That was the real problem. For years, Calloway had operated with an unspoken guarantee. When trouble arose, there was always someone in the government willing to make it go away. A well-placed donation, a quiet favor, a strategic meeting at a private resort. But this time, silence. No one was answering his calls. No one was offering a backdoor deal. The power he had wielded for so long was slipping through his fingers like sand. Garner cleared his throat. "The board is nervous. Some of them are talking about removing you as CEO." Calloway's jaw clenched. "I built this company. They wouldn't dare." "They might have to," Garner said bluntly. "If they think it'll protect Titan Industries, they'll sacrifice you in a heartbeat." Calloway turned, his eyes sharp. "And what do you suggest? That I roll over? That I walk into that hearing like a criminal and beg for mercy?" Garner hesitated. "I suggest you prepare for war. But you need to understand something. This isn't a fight you win with money alone. Vance has the public behind him. They see you as the villain. And if you go in there unprepared, they'll tear you apart." Calloway looked out the window as the Capitol building came into view, standing tall against the stormy sky. "War," Garner had said. Fine. If JD Vance wanted a fight, he was going to get one. The congressional hearing room was a stage, and Richard Calloway had played this game long enough to know how to command one. He sat at the witness table, dressed in the finest tailored suit money could buy, his face an unreadable mask of confidence. Cameras flashed, the press murmured. The world was watching. Across from him, Senator JD Vance sat at the head of the committee, his expression calm but unwavering. His presence alone was a reminder of the warning Calloway had laughed off. But now, there was no laughter, only the cold reality of what was happening. The hearing had barely begun before the questioning turned ruthless. "Mr. Calloway," Vance began, his voice steady, "do you deny that Titan Industries engaged in anti-competitive practices to crush smaller businesses?" Calloway leaned forward slightly, speaking in the measured tone of a man who had faced depositions before. "Senator, Titan Industries has always operated within the bounds of the law." Vance didn't flinch. "That's not what I asked." Calloway smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "With all due respect, Senator, this feels more like a political stunt than a legal inquiry." Vance held up a folder. "This is a collection of internal emails leaked by a whistleblower detailing Titan Industries' strategy to monopolize the shipping industry through predatory pricing and backdoor deals." He let the weight of his words settle before continuing. Would you like me to read them out loud? For the first time, Calloway hesitated. He had known there was evidence. His lawyers had warned him, but hearing it presented this way, in front of the entire country, was something else entirely. The room was silent. The cameras captured everything. Vance didn't stop. You built an empire by rigging the system, Mr. Calloway. You manipulated supply chains, bribed officials, and squeezed out small businesses to maintain control. And now, you want us to believe this is all some grand misunderstanding? Calloway clenched his jaw. He had spent decades making sure no one could touch him. But now his power was slipping away, not through backroom deals or private negotiations, but in broad daylight where he had no control over the narrative. A new voice cut through the silence, the ranking senator next to Vance. Mr. Calloway, the DOJ has formally filed charges against Titan Industries for fraud, market manipulation, and obstruction of justice. He paused before adding, and there's strong evidence suggesting you, personally, were involved. Calloway's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about Titan anymore. This was about him. His lawyers had promised they could contain this, that the company would take the hit, but he would remain protected. But now, as he sat under the unrelenting gaze of the Senate, with cameras broadcasting every second to millions of Americans, he realized something chilling. They weren't just coming for Titan Industries, they were coming for him for the first time. Richard Calloway, billionaire, untouchable titan of industry, felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Powerless. Vance leaned forward, his voice calm but final. You laughed when I warned you, Mr. Calloway. You thought this day would never come, but greed always has a price. The air was thick with tension. Calloway opened his mouth to respond, to fight back, to deny everything. But he couldn't, because deep down, he knew. It was over.